This creepy story happened in the 1960s in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics in Samara, which was then called Kuybyshev. The local residents still remember it to this day and shudder when they recall the night creature, the fear, the blood, and the necrophilia. Such things are never forgotten, coming back at night in nightmares. What made people lock their doors and windows at night and go to sleep with the lights on back then? You're watching Strashnota, and today I'll share details about a year of nightly nightmares. I'm not interested in retelling Wikipedia, so there may be artistic reconstructions of events. The facts are preserved, but the official reports written in a monstrous bureaucratic dead language tire me. True crime should be interesting, and the materials that help verify the authenticity of the case I'll leave in my Telegram channel. Share links below the video, comment, like or dislike, and I'll get started. In the 60s, Kuybyshev was considered a developing industrial city. The river station was being built, the Russia chocolate factory was preparing to release its first products, poultry farms were being constructed, and the city was being filled with new buildings. The first tram hurried along its route, ringing. In the evenings, music played at the dance floors, and couples danced and laughed. Olga, a young woman of about 20, was returning home after the dance. After saying goodbye to her friend, she turned into a quiet alley filled with the scent of blooming lilacs. There were about 50 meters left to the house with the small green front garden. The April air had been warmed by the daytime sun, and a gentle breeze softly swayed the branches of the trees with their young leaves. Suddenly, the girl saw a human shadow flicker along the fence ahead. With her unusually long arms, the girl turned around, but there was no one behind her. She quickened her pace, trying not to look back anymore. At that moment, someone jumped out from the corner and grabbed her shoulders tightly. In the dim light of the street lamp, she didn't have time to see the attacker's face. After throwing her to the ground, the attacker began tearing off her clothes, growling and smacking his lips greedily. She screamed with all her might. A man looked out from the house across the street. A dog started barking. "Help! They're killing me!" the terrified girl screamed, even louder. The strong hands let her go, and the shaggy figure disappeared behind the wooden garages. Olga was lying on the ground, her heart was pounding wildly, circles swam before her eyes. The man helped her up and walked her home. The next day the police received statements from two girls, one of whom was Olga. They were attacked at night, but both managed to fight back. Both described the same features: inhuman strength, vicious growls, a shaggy head, and broad shoulders. The attacker was naked and acted quickly and brutally. The girls were so frightened that they couldn't remember any other details. One of them even said that it wasn't a human at all, but more like a large ape or something even scarier. The officer was puzzled. There was no zoo in the city, and the climate didn't suit wild apes. They concluded it was just a regular pervert. But how could they catch him if there were no descriptions or evidence? They decided not to open a case, hoping for luck. They only detained and questioned several former criminals who had previously been involved in similar crimes. None of them were of any use. One spent the whole night drunk at home with a group of drinking buddies, another went fishing with someone else, and the third ended up in the hospital with cirrhosis. But things got truly frightening on the night of April 27th to 28th, 1969. After a small fire in the dormitory on Elektrifitsirovania Street, the Zotkin family, husband, wife, and their 5-year-old son with cerebral palsy, were found in their room at the Progress Factory dormitory. The fire was quickly extinguished, and the police began clearing and inspecting the premises. No one survived. Stepan Zotkin was beaten to death with a brick. 11 wounds were counted on his crushed head. Maria, his wife, was not only beaten to death, but also violated. The criminal did not spare even the sick, helpless boy, Lyonya, and cold-bloodedly smashed his head with several blows. Veteran detective Georgy Rodionovich Knyazkin also recalls, he was an operative officer at the Kirov District Police Department of the city of Kuybyshev. It was a barrack, a one-story brick building. The criminal climbed in through the window and started a real massacre. Spared no one, the whole floor was covered in blood and the belongings were all ransacked. We found out that the Zotkin family was planning to go on vacation. Not far from the crime scene, they found a ripped open suitcase with the victim's belongings, and next to it, investigators found empty cans. It was also discovered that the villain stole a watch, a lyre, and 35 rubles from the victims. The police questioned all barrack residents and those in nearby houses. One of the old ladies admitted that she saw a completely naked man late at night from her window, and he looked strange. Long arms, a hunched back, and thick hair. The investigators started thinking the description was just too similar to what the female victims had given, and it definitely wasn't a monkey. Why would a monkey need money and watches? After this crime, the investigators found out that the victim, Maria Zotkina, had been stalked by her ex-husband. He threatened her and her new family with violence, demanding intimacy in secret from her new husband. When the man was detained, he admitted that he hadn't meant any of those words seriously. Besides, he himself was shocked by the terrible news. He had no alibi. The jealous man was detained and sent to a detention center. The case now included the nighttime attacks. The fingerprints found in the dormitory were not in the database, but they didn't belong to Zotkina's ex-husband either. The man spent more than a year behind bars, but he never admitted his guilt, and the crime stopped. And this alone allowed the police to report to their superiors that the criminal had been found, while the real criminal simply decided to take a break, lying low and waiting for things to calm down. On the night of April 30th, 1970, an unknown person opened the door to an apartment at 67 Aeroflotskaya Street using a screwdriver. He struck the owner, Yekaterina Kutsevalova, with an axe handle, then her daughter Olga. Believing the mother was dead, he then tried to assault her. But the daughter, who suddenly regained consciousness, began to scream, scaring off the necrophile. When the neighbors started waking up at the woman's screams, the criminal fled and the victim survived. The survivors described the same naked, hairy man with a narrow forehead and animal-like eyes. It became clear that the maniac had returned to the city. Zotkina's ex-husband was released from the detention center, and the charges against him were dropped. The next crime happened on the night of May 8th to 9th, 1970. The maniac broke into a house on Chekistov Street. Sorok, on the outskirts of Kuybyshev, killed the 70-year-old owner Praskovia Salova and her 30-year-old tenant Nina Vasilyeva with an axe. He also committed an act of necrophilia with the corpse of the pensioner. After the crime, he poured kerosene from a Primus stove and set it on fire. This time, no one survived. The investigators found a footprint from his bare foot on the windowsill. Jewelry belonging to the owner and some money were missing from the house, but an important piece of evidence was found, recalls Georgy Rodionovich Knyazkin. Under the window through which the killer entered, the firefighters found a bicycle track. We specifically instructed them to preserve anything that stood out while extinguishing the fire, because there had been several strange fires. The track was shown to us by a young firefighter. Look, they even put a board down so that no one would step on it. Georgy Rodionovich and his colleagues quickly notified the police duty officer. The criminal is moving around the city on a bicycle, but there are hundreds of bicycles in the city. It could have taken too much time to find the right one. They needed more serious evidence. After the deaths of the pensioner and her tenant, a local resident, Timofeyev, came to the police to confess. During questioning, he admitted to killing the Zotkin family and 2 women on Chekistov Street. The man spent about a month in custody, but the investigators began to doubt his involvement. After the inconsistencies were pointed out to him, Timofeyev retracted his confession, stating that he had falsely accused himself on purpose to see how the police work. He really turned out to have nothing to do with it, and he was given a suspended sentence for giving false testimony and then released. As it turned out later, Timofeyev had previously been registered at a psychiatric hospital in Kuybyshev. His sick fantasies only confused the investigation, delaying the capture of the real maniac. At the end of May of the same year, a new crime was prevented. The maniac broke into the apartment of the Akimov family and quietly crept up to their bed, preparing to kill them with an axe. But at that moment, the husband suddenly woke up. Without hesitation, he attacked the stranger with a stool. The attacker immediately tried to run away, but the homeowner managed to grab him by the legs and even bit him on the butt, but the uninvited guest managed to break free and escape. Despite the setback, the maniac continued his bloody hunt. On the night of June 5, 1970, at 26 Podgornaya Street, he climbed into a house through a window and attacked the Malomanov family, the husband, the wife, and their 2 children, 10-year-old Tanya and 5-year-old Seryozha. They all died from chop wounds inflicted with an axe. When no one was left alive, the necrophile used the mother's body and took a Pobeda watch and 100 rubles. As he left, he set the house on fire. The neighbors noticed the smoke and called the firefighters. The firefighters responded quickly and put out the fire before anything could burn down. They also called an ambulance and the police. When the medics arrived in the morning, they saw a man sleeping on a bench and a bicycle nearby, but in their haste, they ignored it. Only later did one of the doctors recall that the man was unshaven and wearing a long coat. 3 days later, the maniac tried again to break into other people's homes, but each time the owners woke up and raised the alarm, he ran away without even starting his crime. Panic broke out in the city, and people began retelling frightening details to each other. They said that an unknown creature, whether human or not, was getting through locked windows and doors and attacking peacefully sleeping citizens. The night creature spares neither women nor small children. The Supreme Soviet of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics elections were threatened. The people of Kuybyshev refused to go to the polls and let campaigners into their apartments, even if they were accompanied by police officers, and openly said, "We won't vote until you catch the night creature." Those who had the opportunity bought hunting rifles, while residents bought up axes and pitchforks and placed them at the head of their beds. Day and night, patrol volunteers were on duty in the streets, recalls Larisa Cheremukina, a former inspector of the Children's Police Room at the Kirov District Department of Internal Affairs in Kuybyshev. Residents of private houses were afraid to go to sleep. They didn't put out their kerosene lamps at night, afraid to sleep without light. Women were afraid to work the second shift. Many flatly refused even under threat of being fired. The city was gripped by mass hysteria, and the discontent threatened to turn into a popular uprising. In Moscow, decisive action was demanded from the local authorities. Help was on the way. A group of detectives from the Union Ministry of Internal Affairs flew from the capital to Kuybyshev. An investigative team was formed in the city to catch the maniac, headed by the chief of the Criminal Investigation Department of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics Ministry of Internal Affairs, General Igor Karpets. Police patrols were strengthened in the city, and the number of volunteers on night duty was increased, with dozens of ambushes set up in the private sector. Young workers from local industrial enterprises signed up for these duties, and they were given time off for this purpose. Igor Karpets made a map of the attacks, which made it clear that the criminal was acting chaotically, preferring not to appear in the same area twice. The general put forward the theory that the maniac was using a vehicle, and the trace of a bicycle tire supported this idea. Near the crime scenes, close to the house where the maniac committed the last execution, the investigators found a wrench stamped with the Kharkov bicycle factory mark. These details confirmed that the investigation was on the right track. On the night of June 8, 1970, Kuybyshev patrol volunteers noticed a lone cyclist on the street wearing a raincoat, under which an axe was visible. The law enforcement officers tried to detain the man, but he abandoned his bicycle and threw away the axe, then ran toward the railroad. Before that, he ran into a nearby yard and hid in an outdoor toilet. And when one of the patrol members caught up with him there, the cyclist hit him on the head with a brick and rushed toward the railroad tracks. Then the man climbed onto a train and jumped off it on the other side, getting away from the patrol members. And then he jumped over the fence of the nearby Progress factory, but he miscalculated by a few minutes. The fugitive was caught by the security of the restricted facility. The guard fired a warning shot into the air from his standard Nagant revolver, and the bold man stopped. He realized it was all over. The arriving police apprehended the murderer. In front of them lay a short man of about 30, naked except for a coat, with disheveled hair, long sinewy arms, and a wild look in his eyes. There was no doubt left, this was the night creature. The arriving police van took him to the district police station. The man caught turned out to be Boris Serebryakov, a 29-year-old resident of Kuybyshev, not a criminal with a dark past, but an ordinary worker at a cable factory. He was born a little after the start of the Great Patriotic War, on August 18, 1941, in the city of Molgobek, Chechen-Ingush Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic. His father passed away, so he was raised by his mother. He also had two sisters, one younger and one older. From an early age, he had a wild temper and a tendency toward alcohol. He got into fights, brawled with random passers-by, and even fought with relatives and friends. He also had numerous run-ins with the police for petty theft and arson, but for various reasons he only received reprimands and was never convicted. Besides that, Serebryakov wasn't lucky with women. He would make scenes of jealousy for his girlfriends, accusing them of cheating without any reason. Having sadistic tendencies, the young man often resorted to physical violence, wanting to punish the girls, who quickly left him because he was aggressive. He moved to his older sister in Kuybyshev after 3 years of military service at the beginning of 1967. Previously, the woman rarely spoke to her brother, only inquiring about him in letters to their mother. But still, she didn't refuse to help him. However, she made him promise not to embarrass her with hooligan antics and not to drink too much. He agreed, recalls Georgy Rodionovich Knyazkin. His sister, the chief accountant at a construction company, arranged for Boris to live in the Sorokino 3 dormitory with the construction workers. His sister helped him get a job as a cable cutter at the cable factory in Bezymyanka. The work turned out to be hard for Boris. He had to cut twisted metal cables. While other people's axes weighed about 6 kilograms, his weighed 12 to 15, but he handled it with surprising ease. The guy was a little above average height, looked like an orangutan with his arms hanging down, but he could chop through a cable with a single swing, confirms Knyazkin. I spoke with his workshop co-workers. Boris was never seen drunk and was described as quiet, calm, and without a criminal record. Boris rode his bicycle to work and back to the dormitory, and he was even praised for it. After all, a healthy mind in a healthy body. At home, the young man was quiet. There might have been conflicts, but nothing serious. Acquaintances and roommates described him as reserved, quiet, and moderate with alcohol. He never drew any attention to himself. After his arrest, Boris Serebryakov was silent for days. Generals from the Ministry of Internal Affairs came to Kuybyshev. The night creature made headlines across the entire country. The fiend set conditions and wanted to communicate only with certain people. When he was taken to the Sizran pretrial detention center, my deputy Viktor Korostelyov and I were sent there as well. Our task was to prove every crime he committed, where he took the watch, where he hit someone, says Knyazkin. We lived in the detention center for more than 2 weeks, and our very first conversation took place at 23:00 when Serebryakov knocked and said, "Give me the investigator." The interrogation room was prepared in advance, with several guards on duty there, recalls German Knyazkov. He behaved as if that's how it was supposed to be. Didn't regret anything. Killed. So what? His hair was messy, nostrils flared, huge mouth. It was immediately clear what kind of person he was just from his appearance. There was a certain disgust, but we set aside any personal feelings. He explained his cruelty with 2 words. Why should I? Witnesses? After the attack on the apartment of Yekaterina Kutsevalova and her daughter, he firmly decided that he needed to strike for sure so they wouldn't come to, otherwise there would be too much noise. He calmly recounted how, in the Malomanov house, the girl begged, "Uncle, please don't hurt us. We won't tell anyone." But he never intended to leave anyone alive. After dealing with Tanya, he dragged 5-year-old Seryozha out from under the bed and struck him hard on the head. He confessed to all the crimes, hardly arguing, especially after they showed him the belongings of the victims that had been taken from him, including the Pobeda watch that belonged to the late Malomonov. The surviving grandmother remembered them well. She was on a night shift at the time of the attack, which is why she survived. They managed to find a lot of stolen items from Boris. Why didn't he get rid of them, or at least hide them in a stash? Serebryakov proudly replied that these were trophies. All of this only reinforced his guilt. German Knyazkin says, "We went to the crime scenes, visited people, made announcements on the radio saying that we caught this person and if anyone knows anything, let us know." The scale of his actions became clear only after his arrest. Before that, many were afraid to come forward, and some probably never did. During the investigation, it was revealed that Serebryakov committed his first attack back on September 5, 1967. At night, he attacked tram dispatcher Yekaterina Kharitonova right at her workplace in the dispatcher's office of the 8th tram service hub in the city of Kuybyshev, near the Ikran factory on Kirov Avenue, recalls German Knyazkin. At 1 o'clock in the morning, Boris saw that the woman was alone, already without her pants, climbed into the workplace through the window and started harassing her. He had a cleaver in his hands, which he always carried with him. But Yekaterina turned out to be very brave. She screamed, got struck by the cleaver on her arm and head, but still desperately fought back against the maniac. In the end, Kharitonova broke free, jumped out the window and ran away. By that time, a tram had arrived at the scene and the conductors came to help, which scared the criminal away. Everything happened so quickly that the victim couldn't really tell the police anything, and hardly remembered any details about the attacker. A criminal case was not opened immediately due to the investigators' negligence. At first the case was dismissed, but after a thorough review, the employees who made the mistake were later fired. Serebryakov admitted that after that incident at the depot, he got scared and decided not to leave any witnesses alive. He attacked houses because they had something to steal. At first, he didn't want to admit to the episodes of night attacks on girls, but later he agreed, noting that things didn't work out for him with living women. After the first crime at the Zotov's house, he chose to lay low. "Will you catch him?" he said during the interrogation, smirking, and soon realized that he got away with everything. He would ride his bicycle around the city for hours, looking for the most secluded places, making sure there were women, and at night he would return, having undressed in advance so as not to get dirty, and break in through the window. And he didn't like living women, they didn't arouse him, he loved the dead. It didn't matter if they were old or young, they were easier to deal with, they didn't scream, didn't scratch, and were ready for anything, he said with pleasure during the interrogation. And money and valuables were like trophies from such confessions. Many investigators were ready to kill him with their own hands, but work is work. They had to listen and endure it. The answer to the question of why Boris Serebryakov, also known as the Kuybyshev monster and the night creature, committed such unimaginable atrocities was sought by the best doctors of the Soviet Union. His goal was greed and the satisfaction of his unnatural lust, says Georgy Rodionovich. The chief psychiatrist of Kuybyshev, Jan Vulis, who was present at the psychiatric examination, asked him the question, "What happened to you? Be honest and tell them your situation with women." That's when Boris told the story about the woman painter. He talked with her for a long time, they met, and her friends laughed. He's not very handsome, but at least as a man, he'll be tough. And one day, he tried to make love to her, but at first she didn't allow anything, and then she took pity on him. But he couldn't do it, so she started cursing him. "You eat like a wolf, but perform like a rabbit, you're a fool and weak." It was hurtful, and because of those words, he beat her. Of course, they broke up. They never found that painter woman, she quit her job and left the city. All the experts agreed with the conclusion that it was the incident with the painter woman that caused Serebryakov's fear of having voluntary sexual intercourse and led to a severe mental disorder. The forensic psychiatric examination determined that Boris Serebryakov is a psychopathic personality and revealed his tendency toward necrophilia. They also noted that he suffered from pyromania and a compulsion to set fires, and that he derived pleasure from watching things burn. At the same time, he was found to be sane and a criminal case was opened against him. It's important to make a clarification here. The fact that no mental illnesses were found in the criminal does not mean that he was normal. One does not rule out the other. Strangely enough, it's just important for the investigation to understand whether the person was aware of what he was doing, whether he was sane at the time of the crime. That's why, for example, psychopathy is not considered a disease during an investigation. He is cold and calculating, but he understands perfectly clearly what he is doing, unlike an insane madman. So, in Serebryakov's case, he wasn't driven by voices in his head or a shadow in the corner of the room, so instead of a hospital ward, he was sent to the Syzran detention center to await a court decision. Twice, the night creature tried to escape, and once he attacked the guards escorting him during a crime scene reenactment. But knowing about his extraordinary strength, they selected strong and physically fit former athletes as his guards. The three of them easily handled him. The second time, Serebryakov pretended to be sick, hoping he could easily deal with the doctors. What a sly guy, huh? At the hospital, he was escorted by a reinforced squad, but his plan failed again. In total, Serebryakov was charged with committing 32 criminal episodes, taking the lives of 9 people, inflicting bodily harm of varying severity on 12 people, 15 break-ins, 7 thefts, 2 arsons, and 3 assaults. In general, Boris Serebryakov is one of the most archetypal and at the same time frightening examples of a serial killer with pronounced sadistic and necrophilic tendencies. His personality is a complex blend of deep psychopathy combined with sexual dysfunction, which he compensates for through extreme forms of violence and social maladaptation. From an early age, Serebryakov showed signs of behavioral disorders, aggression, a tendency toward arson, and petty theft. However, as I mentioned before, the key trigger was an episode of humiliation by a female painter who mocked his sexual inadequacy. I don't understand why someone would do that. Well, basically, that became the catalyst for developing a pathological hatred toward living women and shifting his sexual attraction to dead bodies. His crimes are ritualized: breaking into a house at night, killing with an axe, acts of necrophilia, stealing trophies, and arson. This indicates careful planning, cold calculation, and deriving pleasure not only from the act of violence itself, but also from the symbolic destruction of evidence and the feeling of power over the victim. At the same time, Serebryakov demonstrated a high level of adaptability. During the day, he was a quiet, hard-working worker, but at night he became a nocturnal creature. This indicates a deep split personality and an ability for total control over his social behavior. His behavior during the investigation was calm, even cynical when confessing to the atrocities, showing no remorse and displaying an interest in the investigators' reactions, which is characteristic of psychopathy. He was aware of his actions, but was emotionally detached from them, which is why he was found sane. Serebryakov's motives were not only revenge for humiliation, but also compensation for his own inferiority, by demonstrating absolute power over defenseless victims. His pathology is rooted in a deep fear of living women and an inability to form normal relationships, which led to replacing real sexual contact with violence against the dead. Thus, Boris Serebryakov is a classic example of an organized serial killer with a necrophilic deviant profile, whose crimes were the result of a combination of personality pathology, traumatic experience, and social isolation. And his story is a grim testament to how humiliation and sexual frustration can transform into absolute evil. Police units were deployed to the courthouse, and a cordon was set up to prevent the victims' relatives and enraged townspeople from taking justice into their own hands against the maniac. The police van stopped at the entrance, and the criminal was escorted into court under heavy guard. The cordon was lifted only at the end of the trial. During the proceedings, the courtroom was packed, and people were peering through the windows to catch a glimpse of the man who had terrorized the entire city for almost a year and a half. In 1971, Boris Serebryakov was, of course, sentenced to the highest penalty, and he was unable to obtain a pardon. When the verdict was announced, the audience applauded and Serebryakov ominously said, "I will return." It's unknown if he planned to appeal the verdict again or escape. The sentence was carried out in 1971. The maniac's family ties were not disclosed so that his mother and sisters would not fall victim to the wrath of the outraged public. They honestly testified about their son and brother, how he studied, worked, helped at home, and joined the army. The older sister, who took in Serebryakov, changed her last name, quit her job, and left Kuybyshev. No one knows what happened to the rest, and the burial place of the maniac Serebryakov is also unknown. So, what do you think made him this way? A girl's rejection or deep psychological disorders? Leave your comments, like or dislike, and watch other videos on the channel. They come out even if you don't always get notified. Forget about missing the bell.